The way that we really look at implicit bias and think about it is through our professional development, and this is really why we're here, is what does anti-bias training look like, or interventions. And every year we focus on a particular theme. And I'm going to share with you the last 3 years because they all come together. So as you're thinking about funding and how to fund this work in the program, these are sort of the 3 areas that we find critical. The first is emotional intelligence. So you heard a lot about that, the self-awareness. So we partnered with the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence to explore the role that it has on teaching and learning. And what we realize is that our ability to be self-aware is directly linked to our ability to be our best selves, to be our best teachers. We realize that our emotions, which we heard about too, dictate the way that we see the work and the way that we see children. So imagine a teacher that has enough self-awareness to recognize that they're looking at a child through their lens, right? So a biased lens, perhaps, something that happened to them in their lives that is now making them look at a child in a certain way. And without that self-awareness, that bias is just left unchecked. And that's sort of what we're hearing about in this expulsion, the result in this expulsion rates. So we believe that as a nation, we have to think about emotional intelligence in a different way. We have to give our teachers, we allow them to be better equipped to navigate their own emotions and lenses when they're interacting with children. So that was year 1. Last year, we focused on something called adverse childhood experiences and the relationship between positive, tolerable, and toxic stress. So we learned that positive stress is sort of the things that help you learn how to manage life. For all of us, it may be that we have a flat tire. So that's positive stress. You get through it. You can figure out how to navigate those things. Tolerable stress is a little bit more serious, but it's temporary, and it's relieved by emotional supports and relationships with people in your life. So maybe that your car actually breaks down, a medical emergency, something like that comes up, but you have people in your life that really help you get through that. Toxic stress is a prolonged activation of that stress response, and things like poverty, racism, all forms of abuse, so prolonged abuse in children, and we believe that a child who's either in a tolerable or a toxic stress state is not emotionally ready to learn. So our work is to figure out how to mitigate those effects so that children can be ready to learn. One of those stressors, obviously, is bias and racism and cultural bias and the ways that we look at children. So just to give you an example of tolerable stress, and this really puts it into perspective when we're working with young children. So you're walking in the woods, it's a beautiful day, you're on a trail, you're out on a hike, you come around the corner and there's a bear. There's a giant bear and it stands up and it roars at you. And in that moment, if I asked you to recite the alphabet or to sit during meeting or to count, for example, you'd be unable to do it because your brain is flooded with adrenaline and you're in survival mode. So that's what it's like if we are trying to teach a young child who is navigating racial, cultural, household dysfunction in those moments. So we know, this is just amazing to me, but we know that children that are exposed to prolonged situations of toxic stress or trauma, the brain actually begins to stay in that heightened awareness. So for us, in that bear example, we get out of the situation, we have a family story to tell, our brains go back down to normal, we feel safe, we're able to go about our day. For children who are in that scenario over and over, their brains start to stay in that state. So the fight or flight mode becomes your normal mode, and the neural pathways literally change, and they change permanently. The long-term impact on children as they move into adolescence and adulthood, if they're really in that toxic stress state, are that they're 2 times more likely to smoke cigarettes, they're 4.5 times more likely to do drugs, 7 times more likely to be an alcoholic, 11 times more likely to do intravenous drugs, and 19 times more likely to attempt suicide. So these implications of the way that we treat children based on their race or their culture, their gender, and all the household dysfunction have these lifelong impact and effect. So that's, we have to think about stress and how we navigate it in a different way. And our teachers need to be better qualified to navigate and mitigate the effects of these stressors. And then this past year, we took that information that we had and we realized we needed to focus specifically on implicit bias. We really needed to be extremely intentional in that work. And we realized all the things that you heard, that it's an unconscious, ingrained response. It's just part of who we are. It's automatic. And we learned that awareness is absolutely the first step to counterbalancing it. You can't even counterbalance it if you don't know what's happening. So you have to be open intentional, diligent about it. And so we began thinking about the ways in which we see the world, our lenses as educators. Where do we grow up? What was our socioeconomic status? What are the things that happen to us that then impact the way in which we see children? What are our stereotypes? What do we bring with us? That is hard to do, I mean, as a person, right? Just think about that, and we're asking this of our teachers. So we found three main things to be able to counterbalance implicit bias. One is self-reflection. So we are in a culture of reflection. We expect our teachers to be able to deal with that unfamiliar, that discomfort, and we support them through that. And that comes from the emotional intelligence work. The second is pedagogy. So we believe in something called culturally reflective practice. And in that moment, we are focusing on the child and the family as their own individual, as opposed to them representing an entire group. So no longer are we looking at every black boy in our program as part of one group. We're looking at that boy as who he is and what does he represent, and this boy is who he is and what does he represent. We no longer look at every girl, and you heard this in the video clip about the girls and boys. So girls do this and boys do that. We look at the girls as individuals, the boys as individuals. They may share some commonalities, but it may be across gender, just like it may be across race, across family, things like that. So that's pedagogy. And the third is systems. What are your systems and infrastructure, and how do they support this work? We have a no expulsion policy. We've had it from the beginning before the state adopted it. We're thrilled to see that has come out across the level. But what do we do? That to me is the baseline. And then so what we have done is we have created an emotional well-being program in our school, which tackles cultural and racial biases and interactions and the way that people see the world. And we call it an adverse childhood experiences program, and it's a full-time social worker who is in our program, and it supports the teachers, the staff, the parents, and the children. So it's everyone in our community. Even though the child is the identified client, it's about a tone and culture and climate in the entire community that supports the child.